Hey everyone, it's Melanie of Art Studio 320. This dresser is this week's project. I got it at a thrift store for $15. There is so much going on this piece. The hardware, the drawers that look like doors. Oh no, they're drawers. There's this weird little carving on each of the sides. It's a challenge. And I am so up for it. Oh, it's time for a change, don't you think? Stick around. This wasn't as dirty as I thought it was going to be. I use vinegar and water, 1 part vinegar to 1 part water. That works just fine. It's cheap and you can make it yourself. There was a lot of hardware on this piece, so I had to take that all off, staples and nails and glue, and then I wanted to remove all the extra wood so that I could lighten this piece up and just give it some clean lines. There were 2 pieces of heavy trim on the front. The first piece was about 3/4 of the way down and then kind of like a skirt, but not quite. So I had to make sure that I got out those screws, but you can see here, part of the dresser was coming off that I didn't want to come off. So I had to hammer it back in and then carefully pry off the part that I did want to come off. This next part was a bit of a difficulty. You have to be sure to check for all the hardware, and I thought I did. I didn't really think that it was nailed on, but it was, and the screws were hard to find. Even after putting my hand on there, they didn't come out easily. But in the end, I got my way. I tried something new and put wood filler on before I did any sanding. More about wood filler in a minute, but first, there's this problem. Usually when I get gunk stuck to the sandpaper, it's because I didn't wait long enough for something to dry. But this dresser was dry. I hadn't done anything to it yet. So I, in retrospect, think I probably should have stripped this piece first, but alas, I didn't. And it turned out to be kind of a big problem. I wanted to show some wood, so on the bottom 2 drawers I was going to stain, and then the top I was going to stain. But I did have some issues because the wood was so soft. So I used mineral spirits on the wood I was going to stain to raise the grain. That way, any scratches I created from my orbital sander would sand off after the grain had been raised. More on that later. Now the wood filler. I am putting wood filler on the 2 drawers from the center because there are giant grooves in there from all the stuff I took off. One thing you have to remember about wood filler, at least the stuff I use, Plastic Wood X, is you have to do it in layers, which means you have to put on a layer, let it dry, sand it down, then add another layer. Now, if it's not a big hole or scratch, you don't have to do that. But in this case, I did have to do that because there were big holes. Now, I was painting all the smaller drawers, so I just had to scuff sand those. It was no big deal. And I was painting the rest of the piece except for the top. So that was also just scuff sanded. And I hand sanded some of it, partly because my batteries weren't working properly. They kept dying. And there were areas that I couldn't get to with my orbital sander and had to hand sand. I needed to tape around the raised area on the 2 bottom drawers. I did sand down the raised area a bit, so it was harder to find those edges. But all I had to do was measure it from the edges and the corners, and it was fine. I had 3 colors in mind for this project. The first was lichen, the second was cathedral taupe, and the fourth was Everett. I ended up just using 2, and you'll see later what those 2 are. I say this all the time, but if you don't have tack cloths, you should get some because they will take off all of the dust that you create when you're sanding. And it's important to get all that dust off before you begin to paint. I do have a link to Amazon for tack cloths. You can find that in the description box below. Another have-to-have item, I think, are finishing pads, and you can use those in between each layer of paint that you put on and each layer of top coat. It'll make it nice and smooth, and you can find that in the description box below as well. I have found that it is easy to sand pine. I've also found that it is very easy to scratch pine. So it's a good news, bad news type of thing. Mineral spirits usually works to raise the grain so that you can sand off any of those areas that are problem areas. Once the mineral spirit's dry, you want to sand it again. I used 220 to sand it off, and it did come out nice and smooth. However, when you go back to stain, sometimes things are revealed. On the drawers, more scratches and swirlies were revealed. Now here, this, I believe, was already like this before I sanded it. And I know that sounds like I'm making excuses, but I sanded this all over. I think the veneer was just damaged in that corner. But there were other places as well, and maybe it was me, but I decided I was going to paint some trim around the edges so that I could still reveal some wood, because for me that's always the end game. It's reveal as much wood as you can. The front of the dresser had this natural division between the top and the lower half. So I thought I would bring that all the way around to the sides. Now I had to repair this one spot that was cracked in the back, but that was not a big deal. My idea was that the top 3/4 would be the color lichen, which is kind of a green color, kind of a moss green. And then the bottom quarter would be the cathedral taupe, which is a more neutral color. Not only is mineral spirits a great tool for raising grain, it's also really great to use before you start to stain, especially on a wood like pine. Pine can seem to resist the stain, which creates kind of a blotchy look. And the mineral spirits evens out everything and you get a much nicer finish. This lavender tape is specifically to put over areas that you have just painted. And I'm painting the outer trim in Everett, which unfortunately I don't like, so I end up painting over. I really wanted to show as much wood on the top as possible, and I had already had to paint a green stripe around to cover up the damaged area. And then as I started to look at the wood more, it just was revealing more and more ugliness. It just wasn't a very nice piece of wood. It was veneer, and it wasn't a very nice piece of veneer. I mean, veneer can be really nice, but I ended up just having a small strip that I stained and tried to save, and yet at the end I ended up painting it anyway. I was so sad about that, but sometimes that's just what you have to do. You always want to measure twice and cut once, or in this case, measure twice and drill once. This is not an area that is easy to fix. Trying to patch up a hole and then re-drill a hole can be a nightmare. You don't want that to happen, so just measure it twice, maybe even 3 or 4 times. These drawers are the 2 drawers that I had all of that wood filler on, And you see here I'm sanding again because there is just enough wood filler showing, or you can feel it, that it's creating a bump in the paint and you can see it, or I can see it. So I'm using a 220 sandpaper here, one of my sanding sponges. I started with 80 grit because it was just high enough. It was really hard to get rid of. And I did the best I could. I think I was successful. And I just keep putting my hand over that to feel if it's there, because I figure if you can feel it, you're going to be able to see it. But I did this multiple times before I could get it to a place I felt comfortable leaving it. As I started to put in the drawers, I realized that I didn't like the lichen on the top and the cathedral taupe on the bottom. I just didn't like it. And the drawers hung over the line, and instead of fixing the line, I decided maybe a clean look would look better with the lichen all the way down and around. The difference between a drawer with one knob versus two is just where you place them. On a drawer with two knobs, you want to measure from the end in, and once you decide that, you just want it to be the same on both sides. I find it helpful to start by finding the center of the drawer, but you don't necessarily have to do that. Just remember to measure twice at least and drill once. These fit, but this, the head of the screw, goes right through. So if I use a washer, put it on there, then it doesn't go through. I think the best part about refinishing furniture is the endless opportunities you have to recreate something and make it your own. What I do is going to be different than somebody else because everybody has their own taste, and that's the beauty of it. Last week I said that I really wanted to slow things down, take the time I needed to get it right the first time. I tried very hard to do that this time, and I think I was successful. I did change some things up, but I tried to process before I started, because you can't really see what something's going to look like ahead of time. I had to change a couple things. You have to go into this with the right frame of mind, because if you just look at the end result, if you just want to get it done, well, don't do this. If you go into it with the mindset that I'm not really sure what the end result is going to be, I'm going to just kind of start and see where it takes me, I think you will enjoy it more, and you will be free to change it up if you want. Maybe for some of you that's not a problem, but for me, I have a sense of what I want, but the best way for me to do it is to just start and kind of let the piece tell me. Each piece offers up something different, and depending on what is available to take off or add on or whatever, it's going to change the outcome. So try and keep an open mind with that, and I think you will be happier. Good luck on your next piece. Thank you for being here, and I will see you next time.
You can do it.
Hey, thanks for watching my video. You can find more videos just like this on my YouTube channel. And don't forget to subscribe.